Thank you. Thanks.
Yep. Just give me a second. You ready? Bueno, they're not ready yet.
Okay.
This jacket is changing.
Second. Screen resolution.
It's 800, 600. And this mini computer it cannot do 1024 768. It cannot do better than 1024 600. Good morning. Well, in my time zone it's morning. Came in this morning from the Netherlands and I'm going to talk about SELinux. So who am I? I'm author, technical trainer and consultant. I like to see myself as someone trying to understand SELinux. One day ago I met Dan Walsh. Dan Walsh is with Red Hat and he is the guy behind SELinux, and wow, did I feel dumb. So I've been working with SELinux for a couple of years now, and hey, I'm doing better and better. And it's so good that I'm even trying to explain it to you during this session. Everything I say during this session, you can also read it in an article that I've just finished. First draft is on my website. Take the link from the slide if you're interested. It's on the website right now, so if you need details, more detail than I can give in 20 minutes, you can get it off the website. Who's listening? That's also important, especially when you're talking about SELinux, because there are different levels of talking about SELinux. You can go very deep. It's not my intention to go very deep. It's my intention to talk to sysadmins that normally would just switch off SELinux. I see that too often. They start working on like a Red Hat box and they try to install something like a Samba server, and they try to share a directory and they don't know how to deal with SELinux, and hey, Samba is not working, and if I disable SELinux, Samba is working, so let's get rid of it completely. So the idea of this talk is that after this talk there's no reason to turn off SELinux anymore. Even better, you can go get any other distribution and start configuring SELinux for yourself on that distribution. That is what I've done. I've configured SELinux in particular on different versions of SUSE, and that works. So before going into details, why do you need SELinux? Well, simply said, it's offering good security. Just one example, how are you going to ensure that the web server that's running hundreds of scripts is really secure? I mean, which system administrator really knows what's going on in all the scripts that are offered on the web server? And if you just have one badly configured script, an intruder can just break through the script, get shell access. And he doesn't even need shell access as a root account. Shell access with the web server account is bad enough under bad circumstances to put scripts in some directories and to start bothering the rest of the world. And this is something that's very difficult to avoid given the basic solutions that Linux is offering. Because on Linux there are a couple of directories where every user can create files. And hey, how are you going to prevent that? Do you really want to take away write permission from the TMP directory and the var TMP directory? I don't think so, because it's useful to have those permissions in those directories. And that is where SELinux is going to help. So the purpose of SELinux is very effective. It basically blocks all syscalls, which means that if you enable SELinux and you don't do anything else, nothing works. That's not cool. So you need to do something to make sure that those syscalls that you want to be able to be working, that they are enabled. And yeah, once you start doing that, you will probably lose some functionality, because it's very difficult to have an overview of a system of completely everything that's happening on the system and configuring it in a way that everything works the way it should work. And that is where the policy comes in. The policy is a key component in SELinux. It is used to define which objects get access to other objects and in which way. Wow. Objects getting access to other objects. Well, the basics of SELinux is the context label. The context label that is set on items like the file system, like directories, like ports. And these context labels, they have to match the accessing objects, which means that if your web server wants to access a given file, there's a context label set for the web server, and that needs to match the context label that is set for the file. Let me just give you a simple example of what this looks like. I hope this prompt is readable. Is it readable? Yeah. Okay. I just want to do ls-z. This gives you an overview of all the context labels that are set in my current directory, which is set to default_t, which already reveals that something is not quite okay on this system because it's the home directory of user root. If I do the same thing, ls-z, -z is the option that you can use to find out more information about context labels that are set. You can see, for example, that sbin has been labeled with bin type. srv has been labeled with var type. usr has been labeled with usr type. Now, if there is a web server which typically has the HTTPD type, in a rule in the policy there's a definition that the web server with the HTTPD type can only access a limited amount of specifically labeled files. And there is no way on earth that a web server will be able to access a directory that has TMP type, because that is prevented by the policy. Now, an interesting thing is that you can also find out which types are set for processes that are running on your server, like a command like psaux, and again uppercase Z. You can see the context labels that I set for all the processes on the machine. But let's get back to the slide, because I only have 20 minutes. So the policy is the key component of SELinux, and in the policy there's a context, and the context consists of 3 different parts, which is the user, the role, and the type. Depending on the kind of policy that you are going to use, you can either work with all three of those types, or just with the context type, which is what we have just seen, what you can use to label files. Now, in the policy you will have rules, and the rules, they will define what exactly is possible. And by default, there are many different policies available. If, for example, you look at Red Hat is basically the distribution behind SELinux nowadays. Red Hat has different policies. Policies that are very restrictive and that don't allow anything unless it is specifically allowed. Policies that are a little bit less restrictive and that do allow you to run services without protection of SELinux, and even multi-level security policies. Now, the policy is also the problem if you are going to work with a distribution that doesn't support SELinux. Because in the policy you need rules for all files and all processes on your server. Now, it took Red Hat a couple of years to write decent policies for their Linux environments. And basically it's only since Red Hat 6 that SELinux really is perfect on Red Hat. Now, if you have a look at a distribution like SUSE, SUSE in their SUSE Linux Enterprise Server 11.2, they have stated that from now on they are supporting SELinux on the SUSE platform, but they don't deliver any policy. They tell their customers, hey, we do SELinux, but we don't have a policy, go figure out for yourself. Now, if you realize that in an average policy you will have at least a couple of thousands of different rules that are working with thousands of different context types, you do realize that tuning a policy is really complicated. So if you want to enable SELinux on a distribution that doesn't have SELinux by default, find yourself a policy and go tune it. And that will take a lot of time before you've got it perfect. I have a couple of hints in the remaining slides on what you can do to get a policy for yourself. But first, let's have a look a little bit more about how the policy is working. The best way of using a policy is by using a modular policy, which means that like everything okay?
Yeah, everything's fine.
That means like a Linux kernel, that there are different modules that you can load and that you can unload, which makes it very easy to work with the policy. There is a couple of files involved. The pp file is a compiled policy file, and you can enable them, disable them using the SEModule command. I have tried to include all the relevant commands, the most interesting commands in these slides here, and SEModule definitely is an interesting one that is going to allow you to enable the functionality that you really need. Related to that, there are also some input files. These are the .te, the .if and the .fc files. Now, if you are interested in seeing how those rules in SELinux are composed, it's a good idea to have a look at those files. Because if you take some time and if you understand the concept of SELinux, yeah, they are impressive, but they are not that hard to understand. They are just humanly readable. Now, managing SELinux, what do you need to be able to do as a system administrator? Well, first you need to check if it's alive, which means SE status will show you if your system is using SELinux, yes or no. This is in particular a very important command if you try to enable SELinux on a distribution that doesn't do SELinux by default. Next, in managing SELinux, use permissive mode to start from scratch. That may sound like bad practice, but at least if you use permissive mode, that is the mode where SELinux is fully operational, but it doesn't block anything. In permissive mode, you can analyze what is happening, and at the same time, you still have functionality on your system. Because if you do enable a badly configured SELinux policy and you install it, put it in enabled mode, your kernel will probably panic because it can't start the init process or whatever it's starting properly, because that's prevented by SELinux. So if you really want to build it from scratch, starting in permissive mode really is important. The next task that as a system administrator you will frequently do, you will use SELinux. SELinux is the flexible command that you can use to set context on files, on ports, on whatever you need to have context on. Then we also have setSubul. SELinux uses booleans, and those booleans are a very easy way to change the default behavior of your policy. Let me give an example. There is one boolean that says FTP allow anonymous upload. By default on FTP, SELinux doesn't allow anonymous upload, and there's a rule that specifically states that. Now, instead of changing the entire rule, you can just change the boolean by using setSEBool, which will actually compile the change into the policy if you use the right option with that. I have another slide that shows a couple of examples with those commands. Then we have SEModule. SEModule, we already talked about that. SEModule is what you can use if some part of the configuration is causing you a headache. Because with SEModule you can simply enable or disable SELinux protection for a specific module. Also very useful if you are installing your system, if you are configuring it for SELinux, is to use auditing. Every modern Linux has audit-d. Audit-d writes audit messages to the audit log. Normally those are humanly nearly unreadable messages. But hey, if you take a couple of minutes, you will understand what they tell, and you will exactly understand what SELinux is trying to disallow you to do. And next you can use a useful tool, audit-to-allow. Now, what audit-to-allow is doing is interesting, especially from a security perspective. Because audit-to-allow reads the denial messages, and you can use audit-to-allow to turn those denial messages into policies. Policies that will allow the activity that has been denied before. Yeah, that makes that your system will work even with your SELinux policy, but you should be very careful when using audit-to-allow, because hey, SELinux is trying to secure your system, and you might open your system too much by just using audit-to-allow without understanding what you are doing. And do not use set and force to turn it off. Set and force normally is the only command that system administrators know about SELinux. It's what you use to switch SELinux to permissive mode, which means that it doesn't protect your system anymore. I just mentioned just use audit-to-allow instead. There's a couple of options that you can use audit-to-allow with. I'm not going through every single line here in the slide, just wanted you to have the useful commands in the slide. The idea behind audit-to-allow is the audit-to-allow -m command. That will create an SELinux policy module. So that's a pp file, and next you can use SEModule to enable this module. Now, some examples of common administration commands. Basically, if you want to work with SELinux on an administrator level, that means you have Red Hat, CentOS, Fedora, or anything that comes natively with SELinux. That means you don't have to care about the policy. Basically what you do, you will work with commands like SEManage. And yes, there are different alternatives for using SEManage, but SEManage is the most flexible of all the managing commands. And you will use commands like the first. Now, I know that this is not the type of command that you type easily out of your head, but fortunately, SEManage has a very good man page, and in the end of the man page there are examples. And this just comes from the example. Just the only thing you need to do, you need to find out what exactly is the context type that I need. In this example, the context type is HTTPD syscontent-t, which is needed to open a directory for a web server. The challenge that you have is that there's about 3,000 different context types available. So you need to find the appropriate context type. There are different ways of doing that. Use your good friend Google, for example, or just have a look at the default configuration. I mean, every web server on an SELinux system has a default document root. And if the web server by default works, just check the context type that is set for the default document root, and then you know what you need to do. Or just do SEinfo-T and grep on the output of the command to find which context types are available. Next, when you have set the context type, you need to run restore-conn, because SEmanage is going to write the context type that you want to use to the policy, and you need to apply it. Restore-conn -r is going to do that. In this example, on the directory web and everything that exists in that directory. Now another command, I already mentioned them, the booleans, getSable and setSable. GetSable -a shows you all the booleans that are available. Grab on something like FTP or whatever you need, and you will find very easily the boolean that you need exactly. I think I have 2 minutes left to talk about installing SELinux. Now, this is something that you can read in much more detail in the article that I've put on my website. Now, basically the idea is that you need to enable some kernel options. So what you need is security is SELinux. SELinux is 1 and enforcing is 0. Enforcing is 0 puts SELinux in permissive mode so that you can be sure that it still works. Then you need a policy. Now what I recommend you to do is to download a source file containing the policy sources and compile them yourselves. In order to do that, build.conf is an important configuration file. In the build.conf you tell the SELinux, the make command, that you want to work with a modular policy. And next you can continue the configuration. Most important part of this is the SELinux ready script. The SELinux ready script will check the current configuration on your server and tell you what exactly you are missing. And based on the SELinux ready script, you are going to execute the other commands that are listed on this slide. In particular, interesting, audit to why. Why is the action that I want to perform on this server denied? Audit to why will tell you exactly, and it will tell you exactly what you need to do in order to enable it. Additional questions? I already knew that I was running out of time by the moment that I got to this slide. You are more than welcome to send the additional questions if you have them by email. I always try to answer short mail messages, but maybe you have time for 1 or 2 questions?
Yeah, we could have 1 or 2 questions while Thomas is setting up.
Wow, that's a lot. Well, in that case, I say thank you very much. It's a real pleasure being here in Australia.